again, I use the word resilience. The American people themselves are just, they're amazing people. Like they just, the Star Spangled Banner, the collective, they'll do each other.
The patriotism.
They're like cousins. You know, you can talk about, I can say anything to my cousin, but you can't say anything about my cousin. That's the thing.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Well, speaking of terrorism, like what a segue that is, right? Speaking, no, I don't mean to make light of it, but I mean, I think it was quite the shell shock for Americans, quite the wake up call when we had a terrorist act committed by an organization that was not American. We have al-qaeda in 2001 on September the 11th. And you had mentioned to me that you were in New York at that time. What can you say about that experience? What was that like for you? What was it was, what was in the air? What was it frightening?
It was, uncertainty is always frightening. And I distinctly remember, I brushed on it before where, it was before the age of mass, internet. We didn't have phones, we didn't have internet, and I had just moved into a new apartment, and I worked nights as a bartender. Woke up the next morning, and I literally had a mattress on the floor, towels over the windows as curtains, and my flatmate. Yeah, it was great. You think you've nothing back then, but you've everything because you got a lot less worries or whatever. But
more money, more problems.
Fact. Well, I'm learning the facts. But Porrick, who I shared the apartment with, we got up and I said, Porrick, this is a bad neighborhood we're after moving into here. You hear the sirens, you hear the explosions. Like, I don't know if I dreamt it, but I'm not sure about this neighborhood. He says, yeah. So we walked outside the door, and our neighbor Frank was in the patio. Frank was in his 70s, and he's like crying his eyes out. He's like, the Knock the Towers. What are you talking about? The Knock the Towers, Frank? I said, look at the TV. So this is crazy. This is 10:30, 11 in the morning now. And as we're walking out into the road, we see the F-16 fighter just. This is different. We walk up the Queens Boulevard. Of course, there's tens and tens of thousands of people walking on the boulevard. Just everybody is shell shocked. I worked in the city in a place called Connolly's on 47 between 5th and Madison, which is right around the corner from St. Patrick's Cathedral. And we had a lot of people that would have worked in the financial trade. A lot of cops, a lot of firefighters as well. So. I travelled into the city that night and went in on the 7 train, and it was such a surreal experience just to see no towers. You just seen smoke, and I got out of Grand Central Station, and it was the army was everywhere, walking up Fifth Avenue there. They had there was no traffic, and it was just Hummers and army vehicles into the bar that night. Everybody's just. There's only people left on the island that were stuck on the island, and us service workers.
Yeah, people
trying to get off. People stuck in hotels, but you were just looking around. I remember, I went in at 6 o'clock, worked till 2 o'clock in the morning. Just nobody really spoke. It was just TVs were on. Nobody knew who was alive, who was dead. There was no communication. We didn't know. It was so surreal. We're fully expecting more attacks. We were thinking, well, they were so successful with that. Surely they'll take out the bridges, the tunnels. This is
felt like a movie almost.
Really, really was. And the next couple of months, because we were beside St. Patrick's Cathedral, were equally surreal because all the funerals of the firefighters were taking place there, and it was every second day for, I would say, 3 to 4 months. And then, talking to people that were down and doing the steel workers that were first responders. I get kind of emotional thinking when I watch the footage, I get very, very emotional about it. Just seeing it, but it was. I think in one way it was easier to be closer and be part of that than to be living in Florida, let's say, where it was, you were reading about it but not experiencing it, because we could see my mother. It was on the news here at 3 o'clock in the day, and my mother's like, "Turn off that. That looks like a silly movie." No, ma'am. They're after knocking the towers. Donald's in New York, so they
Yeah.
didn't. He's in New York. He's he must be dead type thing. But when you were there,
you have to. Yeah, you're in it. Yeah, you have to wonder about it versus being there and having a sense of what's happening.
You're hearing the first-hand accounts, which I'm very grateful to experience. Not don't get it, like, obviously it was the worst of the worst, but there was a collective strength in New York that I was grateful to be part of. The resilience.
Yes. Yes, it is so interesting how we like the differences between us melt away very quickly in the face of tragedy. I remember I was working in a restaurant at the time, and I want to talk to you about the restaurant business shortly, but there's always that distinction between the front of the house and the back of the house, the kitchen and the serving staff, and there's a disconnect and sometimes some tension between the two, and you rely on one another, and it creates fights, and it's them versus us. There's the spirit of that. And there, and oftentimes, sometimes it's, well, at least when I was working in the restaurant business and where I lived, they're often drawn, like there's almost like racial lines drawn between the front of the house and the back of the house. And there were some people in the back of the house and that were Hispanic and African-American, and the wait staff was primarily white. And that also added to the tension, I think. And that was back when I used to smoke a lot of cigarettes at that time in my life in the restaurant business. It's a messy time. But I remember going to the back of the house right after 9/11, and we were just talking about it, and that tension between us was gone. And I remember one of his name was Ricky. He was a cook. He was a line cook. And this guy, Ricky, he said to me, "I'm American first." I never would have heard that beforehand. I'm American first. And there was this coming together and this anger that we all tapped into against. I mean, there's a lot of confusions about who it was. I mean, the Arab at that point, it was the Arab part of the world. It was the Muslim part of the world. There weren't distinctions between, it was just a gut reaction. There's a visceral reaction out of fear. There wasn't distinctions between, innocent people from that region of the world and terrorist organizations, or even government versus terrorist organizations. But we all kind of came together in a spirit of anger at the injustice, which is an appropriate response to injustice. Anger is appropriate. And we all came together and the differences were gone. And you really saw, as you said, this kind of collective American strength. It wasn't just in New York. I mean, I think it fueled the whole war. Yeah. I mean, that energy fueled the whole war of us going to Iraq.
100%. And it was an American story through and through in the most iconic city in America. Like, it just, to the outside world, like New York is a lot of what they're surprised when they go outside New York that there's a country outside there. But it was. You know what? It just reminds me of again, I use the word resilience. The American people themselves are just, they're amazing people. Like, they just, the Star Spangled Banner, the collective, they'll kill each other.
Patriotism.
But they're like cousins. You can talk about, I can say it to my cousin, but you can't say it about my cousin. That's the thing.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. From what I understand, that there aren't Irish homes where the Irish flag is being waved out in front of the home.
There are, yeah. We have
a little bit. Well, maybe I'm thinking. I have a friend from London, and he always remarks on how many American flags wave in this country, because there aren't a lot of British flags out in front of homes. That's not true.
There are, but not like America. The patriotism in America is insane. It's It's phenomenal.
Yeah,
You know, like you
it's
just
real.
don't like
Yeah.
from, and we'll talk about the bar business, but you don't, and you don't knock another man's patriotism. You don't knock his country. It's just
Wow.
wrong.
Well, in the last 5 years, 5 or 6 years, that's been another source of tension too. What does it mean to be
Yeah,
American? And you have the athletes not standing for the national anthem, and then people having the outrage in response to that, and it's America's it's cracking in a
from
way.
the inside out, and that's if you ever wanted to, dismantle a country, that's kind of how you do it, and that you can't you see that there's so much focus on the negativity, on the pain, on the hurt, instead of
Yeah.
coming together. What can we do? What's the right thing? The finger pointing is heartbreaking. Really, really is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder if we've seen this in American history too, where the country, in a certain sense, was rescued by
Hmm.
a war.
Yeah.
I mean, the Great Depression was ended by
Hmm.
a war.
Hmm.
And there is something about us, of Americans coming together in the face of a
Hmm.
known enemy,
Yeah.
So I wonder if of all the cracking from within, as you're saying, would be attended to or healed or sealed up with if there was actually some kind of real threat to the America as a
Yeah,
nation.
you'd
You know,
imagine Americans would band together, but the amount of information, misinformation now, and conspiracy theories, and you go
yes,
on Instagram or any of those, and like it's 50%. If you were to spend an hour on it, you'd have two different mindsets of what is the truth. Like
and and they can't possibly both be true, right? Because they're so far
so
away from one
far,
another.
and they're so outlandish, they almost become believable. It's
Yeah.
how could somebody come? It's like I think a media blackout might be a great thing for a year. Maybe an election year would be a good year to do it.
A social media or just
A
media?
bit
Maybe
of
both.
both. Like, yeah, I see it over here. Like the media
Yeah.
is biased across the world. Like, and now there's just so much information coming from all other parts of the world, and all that. Like, I work in sustainability, and we see, you know, the logic has gone out of it. It really, really is.
Yeah.
But you know, as people, I think if you live internally with your family, your faith, all that, that's where you really can make a difference in your community out. That's
Yeah.
that.